there, I'm Julie Sanford from Studio JSD in Michigan, and I am really excited to be here in the studio at Halstead sharing a project using pre-made bezel cups. So what I have here today down on the table, I'll share with you. I have some small 3mm cups, and these have serrated edges, so those are just kind of the zigzag top edges. And then I have one that is a 10mm that is a plain bezel cup. I also have some beaded wire, so we're going to add a little bit of accents on those with beaded wire, and we're going to be soldering those to the plate. So this is just a sterling silver base plate that we're going to be using, and then I'll arrange all the components on here and solder them down, showing you how to do that. And then we're going to just take a saw and cut around all the components, and I'll show you how you can use that into different designs that you might have at the bench. So what I've done is I've already started bending this around into shape. So I just took the needle nose pliers, and I'm just kind of taking these in just little steps and just kind of bending it a little and moving it down and bending a little and moving it down until I get that nice circle shape. It's not quite sitting flat, so what I could do to make this sit a little bit flatter, so I can put this on my bench block like this, and then I can take a mallet and I can just tap this lightly with a mallet. You could also treat this as like a ring and solder that little spot so it's together, and then slide this on a mandrel. But you're going to need to have a special bezel mandrel because this is really too tiny to sit on a ring mandrel. So that's why I'm just trying to get this round as I can so this cup fits right inside of it. It is just a little bit too small. So one thing you can do if it's a little too small is you can stretch this just slightly. So if I put another mandrel on top of this and hit like that, it'll kind of flatten those beads just a little bit, but it'll also stretch this out at the same time, just slightly. Sometimes that's all you need. It's just a little tiny bit of stretch. Okay. So now I need to make sure that the base plate is nice and flat. So I can do the same thing with that. I'll put a bench block on top. That is nice and flat. And so now I'm going to prepare this to solder my arrangement. So I will meet you at the soldering board. Okay, now we have the solder bench out, and I'm getting ready to solder things together. I'll just tell you what we have here. Obviously, quench bowl. We've got the solder pad. I have a nest of binding wire that we're going to be resting the piece on top of, and that's so we can get air and heat underneath the piece. I've got some paste flux. I have medium solder. I have some nice little tweezers and a solder pick handy. So I will go ahead and put some paste flux on this piece front and back. And the paste flux is nice because it just kind of helps hold everything together and in place. So now I have that little beaded ring, and that is going to go right in the center. That is ready. Now the bezel cups, I am going to sweat solder. So I am going to apply the flux just on the back sides of the bezel cups. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the solder on the bezel cups and kind of flow that out. And then I'm going to put them in place where I want them on the plate. And then I'm going to heat it up all over again and solder them in place. So I'll show you what that looks like. So what I want to do next is I'm going to take some solder pieces, pallions, and I'm going to place them on the inside of this ring around the edge, inside edge, so I can solder this down to the plate. We just want to tack this down in a few spots around the edge. It doesn't have to be a solid soldered line all the way around the edge. Because it's beaded, it's going to be kind of hard for that solder to just kind of flow nice and evenly around the edge. but if it catches in a few spots all the way around, it's going to be good. And then I will put some solder pillions on the bezel cup, on the big bezel cup. Put a few on there and distribute those around a little bit on the back side of that cup. And then we'll put a couple on the back side of each of the smaller bezel cups. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and flow the solder here and flow the solder here. After I flow the solder, I'm going to just keep going, and I'm going to place my pieces where I want them on the plate, and then I'll solder those down. So it's going to be all at the same time. I'm not going to turn the torch off after I do one thing before I go to the next. So I've got kind of a medium flame. I don't want this super aggressive. And pull this back just a little bit. I will flow the solder on these bezel cups, back sides of the bezel cups, and again it's medium. See, it's super quick and easy. These things heat up fast. Get that. Now I chose to do it on the bezel cups first before I go over here because this is going to take a little bit more heat, and then it doesn't cool off as much in between. So let me go ahead and heat this up. I'm heating up the plate first all the way around the edge. If I go right into the center, the solder is just going to flow up onto that little beaded ring because a beaded ring is going to heat up much more quickly than the back plate. So I just need to make sure that back plate gets hot, and then when it starts to flow, then I can go inside and hit that. And now I'm going to go ahead and place these on there. So this is going to go right in the center, like that. And then I've got these little ones. Now when you're using bezel cups, prefabricated settings, you want to make sure that you don't get them really close together. So if you can imagine, if these are real close together, you're not going to be able to get a setting tool in between those two sides of the bezels to set that stone. So we need to make sure there's some space in between them. It doesn't have to be as much space as what I'm giving, but you know, you got to make sure they're not like right on top of each other. And you don't have to necessarily make the rings with the beaded wire. You could sometimes use jump rings. Sometimes you can find jump rings that are the exact right size. And I've got a really light flame on here because I really don't want the solder to flow yet because I am still putting things in place. Close there. That looks good. And now I need to heat this up from the back. I'm going to give this torch a little extra flame. I'm going to come in and make sure that back plate gets hot. Now these little serrated bezel cups are really fine, so those will melt easily. So I want to make sure that I am not going to melt those down. So I am just heating up this plate, which is another reason why I have a nice large back plate, because I have lots of space to just, you know, get that heat concentrated on that back plate. There's lots of space there where I'm not like grazing it across those bezel cups, but I am really warming everything up in a nice even way. I can see the solder flowing. Sometimes you can visually see those bezel cups drop. Make sure I get that center one. And I don't want to heat up those little ones, but I want to make sure I get that center. So I'm just kind of doing this little thing where I'm bouncing on and bouncing off, and I can see the solder flowing everywhere. And that looks good. And now I will quench. Oops, turn that off. Quench and pickle. All right, we've got this out of the pickle and it's looking pretty good. Everything looks real secure. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to cut this out with a saw. And what I'd like to do is I'm just going to draw a line around all the components there, and that will be a guideline for sawing. So I've got really nice new fresh Sharpie marker, and I'm just going to take this and outline. I'm going to leave a little bit of an edge all around. I love this, almost like a medieval looking cross or something like that. Quatrefoil design. Okay, so I have my saw all ready to go. I have lubricated the blade, And now I'm going to move over to the bench pin and start sawing. So when you're sawing, you just want to make sure that, you know, your posture is good, you have the correct height that you're working at. So the bench pin should be coming in, you know, kind of mid-chest. Always make sure you have a proper kind of magnification too, because you really need to be able to see those lines really well. So if you don't wear glasses, you still might benefit from OptiVisor or reading glasses or something just to get that detailed view. So I'm going to start with the downstroke. And we're sawing, we just want to remember to keep that handle of the saw right underneath the spot that you're cutting. And if you just remember that, you're less likely to drift, you know, from side to side, which twists and breaks your blade or cuts it at an angle. And the handle is right directly underneath my cutting. I've got a really nice, easy grip on that handle. So if you can look, it's like this. And that way I can just pivot and move. I'm not forcing it forward. It's just really easy. Give it a little turn, just give it a little pivot, nice and easy. I kind of slowed down the rhythm just a little bit while I was turning. When you're turning especially, you don't want to push forward. You just kind of want to gently, you turn the piece, you can turn the saw blade slightly. Almost sawing in place. We're not pushing forward at all. We're just making a pivot. And then we can push slightly forward again. All right, now that I have it all cut out, I am going to go in with some files and just kind of straighten it out a little bit. I've got a couple little bumps here that I need to just kind of finish out, maybe here and here. So I'll file that down just a little bit, and any spots that look like they need fixing. So I'll just use my bench pin to kind of support my work and clean that up a little bit. Kind of looking at it from the back side because I can get a better view of exactly the shape that it is. If I'm looking at it from the front side, then those black lines are kind of getting in my way. So if I flipped it over, I can just kind of work on the symmetry of the piece just a little bit here. So this piece is going to be a pendant. So I'm going to make a bail out of this, and I'm going to show you how to make a rabbit ear bail. And a rabbit ear bail is those types of bails, you know, that have just a little bit of a split in them. So it's got like two parts that are coming up. What I'm going to do is I've got the 16 gauge wire here, and I'm just going to fold the end in half. So let me grab, I like these parallel pliers. So I'm just going to take maybe 3/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to make this hairpin bend in it like this. And I might even take my bench block and kind of mallet, and I'm going to tighten this up as much as I can. So now I've got this tight little hairpin, and I'll cut it off on the other side like this. So now I've got my hairpin, and then I'll take my parallel pliers, holding it tight, and I'm going to bend it in half this way. Try to judge where my half is. And if you need to use your bench pin for leverage, you can use your bench pin to kind of pull that around, bend that around. Got that going about right. So let me get it a little more slack here. There we go. Got that going. I'm going to go with a smaller plier to get in there now. Okay, so we're going to spread this bail out. I've got it started, and what we need to do is we need to open this up to create those rabbit ears. So I've got this plier that I'm just going to stick in there to open it up. And that looks good. It's getting there. And the next step is to kind of bring these ends in together this way. So this is the top of the bail is where it's open, and the bottom ends are coming in like that. Let me open this up just a little bit more. I need to bring that in. Let me grab a round nose plier to hold that kind of open first while we're bringing these ends in together. It was starting to collapse again on itself, so there we go. We'll just hold that open so we have space for the chain to go. And that's coming in together like that. And now I just need to clean that up a little bit. So this is how the bail is going to go on. So that's going to go right on the end there. And now these ends at the back, I am just going to get those like evened up. So even up side to side, and then I will kind of file them so they are the same length. One of them here is just a little bit longer than the other. Just like that. So to solder this on, you've got a couple of options. You could solder these three parts together first and then solder the whole thing onto the back, or you could actually slide the edge of this into your piece, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at this and find an edge that's a little bit longer than the other one. So I am going to fit this right over the end here, and I'm going to solder it on both sides. And I'm ready to solder. So I'm going to start on one side and make sure that I get those two pins soldered down to the back, and then I'll flip it over and solder the other side. I'm going to be soldering this with, you could use easy or you could use extra easy solder for this. I'm going to be using easy solder and making sure those contact points are fluxed well. So the solder is going to flow in between, and just give it a little tweak in the adjustment. This is a great bail to do if you've got an edge to solder it to, but like I said before, you could solder that bail closed first and then just solder it on if you want to solder it right to the edge without clamping the sheet in between the bail. So there's that's ready to go. And now I'm just going to grab my tweezers and get a little bit of solder on here, and I'll put a little piece of solder on each side. And I want this solder to flow on the sheet and on the bail. And the bail is, just a fine small wire, and this whole piece is much bigger and denser. So I'm going to be giving the piece a little extra heat, a little more heat than the bail. And I'll be using not an aggressive big flame, just kind of a smaller flame. That's going to give me time to just kind of move this around, move the heat around, get everything warmed up at a nice even rate. I'm paying attention to the color of the flux, the color of the metal, and just making sure that the colors and what's happening, what I'm seeing is happening at the same time, both on the bail and the back plate. And if one is a different color than the other, then I know my heat's not even. So I need to make sure that I'm getting everything is looking about the same color at the same time. And I'm going to scooch this little piece of solder in a little if I can. And everything looks kind of white and ready, so let me just give it a little more heat right at the bail. And that's soldered on both sides. And now I'm just going to flip it around. And I'm going to add some solder on the front side. This time I'm going to put it on my pick. And I put a little flux on the end of my pick and pick up some solder with the wet end of my pick. If I can do that. There we go. Get this in there. There it is. Scooch that in. Now, everything is already warmed, so it should flow fairly easily and go right where I want it, but I'm still gonna just make sure that back plate is warm. And being careful that I don't give too much heat on top of my serrated bezel cups because those are very delicate. I'm going to shoot some heat underneath. And there we go. And that's all soldered. So I've got the bail all soldered on. And the next step, I am going to show you how to set those stones. All right, so I have this piece out of the pickle, and you guys, it's so stinking cute. I love it. Absolutely love it. So now I'm looking at this bail, and it's the edges of it back here are a little rough, so I'm going to take a file and just kind of, you know, hit that high spot on that back and just taper the edge so it's nice and smooth. Just use your fingers as a guide to, does it need a little bit extra? If it's catching, then yeah, maybe you just need to file it a little bit more. So I have beautiful 10 millimeter malachite, and then I have some tiny little accent stones in black onyx that we're gonna put in there. Oh, now this is interesting. So I have to decide, do I want this? I think I want the stripes up and down. Stripes and the malachite are going to go that way. Oh, that's a beautiful fit. Just sat right in there. Oh, this is so cute. All right, so I'm going to use a curved burnisher to set this one. I like the curved burnisher. This is that, it's kind of tapered. It's kind of thick in the middle and then tapered on the ends, almost like a lentil shape. And then it tapers down here toward the tip. Got to be a little bit careful with this tip because it is sharp and it can scratch your stone, it can scratch your metal, so we want to avoid that tip a little bit. But this curve is really beautiful and it's got a nice taper, so it is going to fit really well, you know, against the edge of the stone and in between these stones. So to set this stone, I'm just going to push this in and give it a squeeze from side to side. And I'm going to kind of push low. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of squeezing it from the middle of the stone, and I'm not necessarily taking that top edge and pushing it over yet. I'm just squeezing the sides in, and then I'll squeeze the sides in from the front, or from the top and the bottom, like that. So side to side, top and bottom. And now I'm going diagonal, so opposites. And by doing opposite, turning it around, doing the opposite side, it's really centering that stone in there so it's not shoved over to one side more than the other. And then I'm gonna, and once you get, you know, once you get the diagonals done, then you've got this kind of a wavy edge, and you can just kind of push in the really, the points that are out the furthest. So now I'm just not really working, you know, this side to that side. Now I'm just going around and I'm pushing in the big bumps. And once I get the big bumps in, then I can just take my tool and just kind of slide it around. So now I'm resting more on the top edge of that stone, and I'm just sliding it around and working it around to iron out all of those bumps like that. Now for me, I'm holding this out in a way that the camera can see it. But to be a little more efficient, I would, if in my own studio, I hold it like this. And that way I have a lot better view of it. You'll get a lot more leverage and you have a lot more control over the tool if it's, you know, if it's close to you like this. So, you know, you could just travel around and around and around until you get that so it looks really smooth and even all the way around. So that one's done. Now I'm going to work on these tiny little ones. The serrated cups are super easy to set. You don't really have to go around and around as much as you do with the straight one. If you have a hard time picking these up, you can use a little wax tool to pick those up. So here we have some beeswax. Beeswax is really soft, especially if it's warm. And here we have some beeswax, a chunk of it right on the end of a toothpick, and that just makes it really nice pick up for tiny stones like that. I'm going to put that one in there, put this one in there. This little cup got smushed a little bit, so I need to kind of push those push that bezel out. I must have bumped around on the edge a little bit of that one, so. Still a little tight. We'll get that pushed in. There we go. All right, and then the last one. Okay, so this time with those serrated, these are almost like little prongs, and I can just like slide this around the top, and it just really tightens up so easy and beautiful with very little effort. This curved burnisher is my go-to tool for this. You could also use a prong pusher, which is this tool. It's in, it's got a little graver handle on it that's just really fits in the palm of your hand. So it's really easy to control too. And you can just kind of push all the way around with this. And that is a great tool to use. Sometimes if you've got, really small gaps between your stone and it's difficult to get a tool like this in between or a tool like this in between, they do make these really small burnishing tools that you can get in there and work the same way. It's just a little easier to get in between those stones with a small tool like this. All right, so there you go. It is our serrated bezel and plain bezel cluster pendant. I hope you enjoyed this project. Again, I'm Julie Sanford with Studio JSD and Halstead Jewelry Supplies.